Ogun vs. Olokun, Epic Battle of Gods and Mortals. Chapter 1: The Rise of Ogun. In the beginning, the world was raw and untamed, a vast expanse of land and forests unshaped by hands or tools. It was a time when humans struggled against the wilderness, unaware of the power of creation and the forces that governed life and death. From the fiery heart of the earth rose Ogun, the god of iron, war, and labor, whose destiny was to shape the land, craft weapons, and forge civilization itself. His emergence marked the dawn of a new era period, where strength, discipline, and ingenuity would rise to challenge the chaos of the natural world. Ogun's first footsteps scorched the earth, leaving trails of molten iron and smoldering fire. Wherever he passed, the trees bowed and mountains seemed to tremble under his might. He was not a god of mere destruction. Rather, he embodied the tools and skills that would enable both gods and mortals to conquer the wilderness. His hammer rang like thunder against unseen anvils, striking raw ores from the mountains and shaping them into weapons, tools, and instruments that would later define civilizations. Every spark he produced carried the essence of life, progress, and the unyielding force of order. It was said that Ogun's voice carried over the forests like rolling thunder. When he called, animals fled, rivers recoiled, and the earth itself seemed to listen. But alongside his fearsome presence was a sense of purpose. He came not to enslave, but to prepare the world for mortals, to grant them the means to survive and thrive. His eyes glimmered with determination, reflecting the fires of the forge and the weight of destiny upon his shoulders. The forests and plains were wild, but Ogun saw potential where others saw chaos. As he roamed the lands, Ogun began teaching humans the secrets of his craft. Those who approached with respect learned to work metal, to build sturdy shelters, and to create weapons for protection. The art of forging became sacred, a divine inheritance from the god himself. Warriors and blacksmiths alike sought his guidance, bringing offerings of iron, wood, and animal hides to honor his presence. Villages slowly formed around the places where Ogun had walked, for the god left more than destruction. He left the promise of civilization and the tools to defend it. However, the rising influence of Ogun did not go unnoticed. Beneath the waves, in the endless depths of the oceans, Olokun, the god of the sea, observed the spread of human settlements and the shaping of the land with suspicion. Olokun's domain was vast and mysterious, a world of immense power and hidden treasures. Unlike Ogun, who worked openly on land, Olokun's movements were concealed in the shadowy depths. He saw the forging of weapons and tools as an encroachment on his authority, a challenge to the natural balance he maintained in the waters. The tension between the land god and the sea god simmered, though it had not yet boiled over into open conflict. In this early period, Ogun focused solely on his work, unaware of the eyes that watched from beneath the waves. His workshops were scattered across mountains and valleys, each a blazing testament to human ingenuity and divine intervention. Mortals revered him not just for his strength, but for the knowledge he imparted. He taught them to hunt, to farm, and to defend themselves. Every strike of his hammer was a lesson, every spark a spark of wisdom. Ogun's presence became a cornerstone of culture, a symbol of resilience, mastery, and progress. Legends say that the first weapons forged by Ogun were unlike anything seen before, spears that could pierce through the toughest hides, swords that gleamed like the sun, and axes that could fell entire forests in a single swing. Mortals marveled at these creations, recognizing the gods' immense power and wisdom. Yet, with every hammer strike, Ogun's awareness grew that the world was not a place solely for land. The seas, too, held forces that might one day contest his authority. He had yet to face Olokun, but he felt the brewing tension, a prelude to a conflict that would shake the realms of gods and mortals alike. Even as humans flourished under Ogun's tutelage, he remained vigilant. He wandered the forests and plains, inspecting his work, testing the strength of weapons and the resolve of those he had taught. Occasionally, he would pause at the riverbanks, gazing at the depths, sensing the silent power of Olokun beneath the waters. The god of iron knew that the oceans were not idle. They were alive with the presence of a deity who would one day challenge him. For now, Ogun's focus remained on the land, his forge, and the mortals who depended on his gifts. The rise of Ogun signified more than the ascent of a god. It marked the birth of civilization and the dawn of human mastery over nature. Villages grew into towns, tools became weapons, and the skills of forging and construction spread across the land. Yet, even in this time of creation and learning, the seeds of conflict were sown. Olokun's gaze never left the shore, watching, waiting, and preparing for the inevitable clash that would test the strength of gods and the courage of humans alike. Thus, Ogun emerged as a beacon of strength and order, a divine blacksmith and warrior, whose hammer would shape not only iron, but the destiny of mankind. And though the shadow of Olokun loomed beneath the waves, for now, Ogun's fire blazed freely across the earth, heralding the beginning of a saga that would forever be remembered in the myths of the Aruba people. Chapter 2: The Dominion of Olokun beneath the vast, unending expanse of the ocean, where sunlight scarcely penetrates and shadows dance among the waves, dwelt Olokun, the enigmatic god of the deep. Unlike Ogun, whose forge blazed across the land, Olokun's realm was a kingdom of mystery, power, and infinite depth. His dominion stretched through oceans, rivers, and hidden inlets, encompassing riches both tangible and mystical, coral palaces, treasures lost from the surface world, and the boundless knowledge of the waters. To mortals, the sea was a place of both sustenance and fear, and Olokun's presence explained its unpredictable and often deadly nature. Olokun was a deity of immense patience and quiet menace. While he did not seek needless conflict, he defended his watery realm with a ferocity that matched the fiercest storms. Fish, whales, and sea serpents all recognized his command, moving as extensions of his will. The tides, currents, and tempests answered his unspoken word, shaping coastlines, sweeping ships into distant lands, and revealing the god's control over both life and death beneath the waves. Sailors whispered of his gaze, claiming that even the slightest offense to the sea might invoke Olokun's wrath, bringing flood, storm, or mysterious vanishings to those who dared intrude. Yet, Olokun's motives were not solely destructive. He saw the ocean as a sacred repository of balance and abundance, a mirror to Ogun's domain on land. Just as Ogun forged civilization with fire and iron, Olokun nurtured the creatures of the deep, maintained the flow of waters, and ensured the survival of life dependent on the sea. He guided tides to nourish the soil along riverbanks, brought rains to replenish the land, and guarded the hidden wealth of the underwater world. To Olokun, the ocean was a realm of both opportunity and caution, Mortals could benefit from it, but only by respecting its might. The rise of Ogun and his spread across the land did not escape Olokun's notice. From the silent depths, the god observed as humans wielded weapons forged by Ogun's hands, building fortresses, clearing forests, and expanding settlements. While he did not oppose human progress outright, Olokun perceived a shift in the balance of power. The land, once untamed and neutral, was increasingly dominated by the influence of Ogun, whose tools and weapons extended human reach and ambition. This disturbance set the stage for a confrontation that would test the limits of both gods and mortals. Olokun's first actions were subtle. He whispered to the currents, nudging them toward rivers, causing tides to rise unpredictably, and catching fishermen off guard. He summoned storms that bent the reeds of coastal villages and churned the waters near ports. Ships would sway violently, sometimes capsizing, reminding humans that the seas were alive with the will of a god. Though these acts did not directly challenge Ogun, they were deliberate warnings. The oceans were not to be trespassed upon lightly. Despite the tension, Olokun maintained a degree of wisdom and foresight. Unlike a god consumed by rage, he understood that a direct clash with Ogun would have consequences far beyond the mortal world. The land and sea were intertwined, and their forces could either devastate creation or coexist in balance. Thus, Olokun began preparing his dominion carefully, commanding the sea creatures, enhancing the strength of his storms, and summoning mystical artifacts from the depths that could challenge Ogun's fiery forges. He knew that the eventual confrontation would require not just brute force, but cunning and strategy. In his underwater palace, carved from the finest corals and guarded by serpentine guardians, Olokun contemplated the future. Here, time flowed differently. Hours and centuries passed indistinguishably as he prepared. He called upon emissaries merfolk and river spirits to extend his influence to distant waters, gathering intelligence on Ogun's movements across the land. Through these agents, Olokun learned where villages had grown, where humans tested their weapons, and where Ogun's fires burned brightest. Each discovery strengthened the god's resolve to assert his dominion when the time was right. Mortals, for their part, remained largely unaware of the god observing their every action beneath the waves. They only felt the consequences: sudden storms at sea, erratic tides, or the mysterious disappearance of fish and marine resources. Priests and shamans interpreted these signs as messages from Olokun, offering sacrifices and prayers to appease the deep god. Temples rose along the coasts, adorned with seashells, coral, and sacred water basins, paying homage to the deity whose presence was felt but rarely seen. Olokun's influence was subtle yet undeniable, a reminder that even in the land-dominated world of Ogun, the ocean held sway. The tension between the two deities grew with each passing year. Ogun's forge spread across the earth, strengthening human settlements, while Olokun's dominion in the waters became more assertive, reminding humans and gods alike that power was not confined to the land. Both realms thrived under their respective guardians, yet the stage for inevitable conflict had been set: the land god and the sea god, each embodying different aspects of creation. Fire and iron versus water and mystery would soon meet, their confrontation shaping not only their own legacies but the destiny of humankind. By the end of Olokun's preparation, his dominion had reached its zenith. The sea teemed with life and concealed weapons, tides moved with precision, and storms were ready to unleash at his command. the god of the deep, knew that the day of reckoning with Ogun was drawing near. When it came, the battle would not merely be a clash of gods. It would be a war that would mold the world itself, defining the boundaries between land and sea, chaos and order, fire and water. Olokun was ready, patient and unyielding, knowing that the oceans held secrets and power unmatched by even the mightiest forge. Thus, Olokun's dominion was established, a kingdom of profound mystery, immense power, and vigilant oversight. The god's presence beneath the waves reminded mortals that while Ogun's hammer could shape the land, the waters were alive with a divine will of their own. The balance between fire and water, land and sea, had begun to take form. Yet the ultimate confrontation loomed on the horizon of battle that would echo across generations, immortalized in the myths of the Yoruba people. Chapter 3: The growing tension as the sun rose over the vast plains and forests of the land. The humans went about their daily lives, largely unaware of the brewing conflict between the two mighty gods above and beneath them. Ogun, with his blazing forge and hammer that rang like thunder, continued to teach mortals the ways of iron, war, and craftsmanship. Villages flourished under his guidance, tools and weapons multiplying, and settlements expanding ever farther into previously untamed wilderness. Yet, with every human achievement and every newly forged sword, the ripples of tension spread across the world, reaching even the deepest oceans where Olokun watched silently. Olokun, Lord of the Deep, observed the expansion of Ogun's influence with both curiosity and caution. From the hidden depths, he felt the vibrations of metal striking metal, fires that warmed the land, and the unstoppable march of civilization. To the sea god, Ogun's creations were not merely tools, they were symbols of dominance over the natural order. Every forge, every hammer strike, every fortified village represented a challenge to the equilibrium that Olokun had maintained for eons in the waters. The tension between land and sea, fire and water, iron and the deep, grew with each passing day. It began subtly at first. Storms that had once been gentle and predictable became restless, winds shifting unexpectedly, waves rising higher than they had in generations. Fishermen and sailors spoke in hushed tones of the sea's growing capriciousness. The way tides seemed almost sentient, moving with intent rather than chance. Ships that had weathered countless journeys were tossed, oars snapping under pressure, cargo spilling into the depths. To mortals, it was a warning. To Ogun, it was an intrusion on the stability he sought to establish. And to Olokun, it was a necessary demonstration of his own power, a reminder that the seas were not to be disregarded. The tension escalated further as Ogun began constructing great settlements along the coastline, encroaching ever closer to Olokun's watery dominion. Human ingenuity, fueled by divine instruction, carved the land, created ports, and built bridges where none had existed. The god of the forge knew he was preparing humanity to thrive, but he felt the unseen eyes of Olokun upon every endeavor. Sparks from his hammer seemed to sizzle in the air, almost charged with anticipation, as if aware that their light might provoke the god of the sea. The world itself seemed to hold its breath. In response, Olokun summoned the first ripples of direct interference. Currents shifted in unexpected patterns. Tides rose to flood riverbanks, and sea creatures acted with unnatural coordination, disturbing fishing grounds and coastal villages. Ships were carried off course, some lost entirely, forcing humans to acknowledge that the ocean was alive with a will far beyond their comprehension. Olokun did not seek to destroy humanity outright, but he needed to assert that his domain was neither submissive nor passive. The balance of power had begun to tilt, and both gods were aware of the necessity to establish boundaries. As days turned to months, subtle encounters occurred between Ogun and Olokun. When Ogun crossed rivers or ventured near the coast with his forge blazing, the waters rose unnaturally, sometimes splashing over the banks, forcing him to pause. At times, Olokun's deep rumblings caused tremors in the earth near the shores, a warning that the sea could respond with force if provoked. The humans who witnessed these phenomena began to tell tales of the gods' displeasure, preparing rituals and offerings to appease both divine powers. The tension, once abstract and distant, had now become tangible, shaping the daily lives of mortals and the land they inhabited. Despite these warnings, Ogun pressed forward. He taught mortals to harness the iron within mountains, to forge tools that would cut through wood and stone alike. He established workshops and trained warriors, creating settlements that were resilient and capable of withstanding natural disasters. Each new achievement further provoked Olokun, who perceived these acts as challenges to his sovereignty over the waters. From the ocean's depths, he began to plan a more coordinated response, summoning currents, storms, and creatures to test the strength and ingenuity of both humans and the land god. The stage was being set for confrontation. The tension was not merely physical, but also symbolic. Ogun represented progress, order, and human mastery over the earth, while Olokun embodied mystery, patience, and the unpredictable forces of nature. Their domains were distinct yet intertwined. The land depended on the sea for sustenance, and the sea's currents shaped the contours of the land. This delicate interdependence meant that any outright clash would have consequences for mortals as well as gods. Both deities recognized that patience was as much a weapon as strength, and that strategy would determine the outcome of their eventual conflict. As the world adjusted to the growing tension, humans began to create stories and myths attempting to explain the strange phenomena. They spoke of the hammering god of the land, whose fire could shape mountains and metal, and of the silent, powerful deity beneath the waves, who could summon storms and floods at will. These tales were shared around fires, sung in villages, and passed down generations, embedding the tension between Ogun and Olokun into the cultural memory of the people. Mortals understood, in some instinctive way, that they were witnessing the stirrings of a monumental struggle, one that would define the balance of their world. By the end of this period, the tension between Ogun and Olokun had reached a critical point. The gods had not yet clashed directly, but the subtle skirmishes of storms and sparks hinted at the approaching confrontation. Both deities now understood the stakes, the fate of human civilization, the order of the natural world, and the balance between land and sea would hinge on the resolution of this growing conflict. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable day when fire would meet water, hammer would meet tide, and the legacy of these mighty gods would be forged in battle. Thus, the growing tension set the stage for the epic battles to come. Ogun's fires and Olokun's waves, once parallel forces shaping human existence separately, were now on a collision course. The land and sea, order and chaos, iron and water, all waited for the moment when the clash would erupt, an event that would resonate through generations and be immortalized in the myths of the Yoruba people. Chapter 4. The first skirmish. The world held its breath as the long simmering tension between Ogun, god of iron and war, and Olokun, god of the deep, finally erupted into open conflict. It began not with a clash of full armies, but with a series of calculated maneuvers, tests of strength and skill that would set the tone for the battles to come. Ogun, with his hammer and forge blazing, marched toward the coast where rivers met the sea, preparing to expand human settlements and fortify villages with his divine knowledge. Olokun, aware of these movements, stirred the waters, sending ripples and currents to challenge the land god's influence and remind mortals that the ocean held dominion as well. The first skirmish occurred along a narrow river delta, where human settlements, built under Ogun's guidance, reached the edge of Olokun's domain. Villagers watched in awe and fear as the god of the forge arrived, carrying molten iron and weapons that glimmered in the morning sun. His hammer struck the ground with resounding force, shaping earth and stone into fortifications capable of resisting storms, floods, and even attacks by supernatural forces. Yet, as Ogun worked, the waters began to rise unnaturally, swirling with serpentine energy. Fish leaped violently from the depths, and waves surged against the shore with a force that no mortal could withstand. From beneath the waves, Olokun observed the construction of human settlements with sharp scrutiny. The god's patience had waned, and he sought to demonstrate the power of the sea. Rising currents and tidal surges threatened to sweep away the fortifications, but Ogun was prepared. Using his hammer and divine strength, he directed molten iron into the waters, forging barriers and weapons that could repel the tides. Sparks flew, steam hissed, and the river delta became a battlefield not just for mortals, but for gods themselves. The clash of fire and water, iron and tide, created a spectacle that left villagers both terrified and awestruck. The battle was not merely a test of strength, but of strategy. Ogun moved methodically, using his knowledge of the land and the forge to predict Olokun's movements. He hammered stakes into the riverbed, created channels to divert the surging waters, and crafted weapons that could strike at sea creatures that emerged to enforce Olokun's will. Each strike of his hammer sent ripples through the water, countering Olokun's currents and demonstrating the god's ingenuity and command over his domain. Yet Olokun was not idle. With every attack, he responded with waves that shifted unpredictably, currents that carried hidden dangers, and creatures that attacked from the depths, forcing Ogun to adapt continuously. Mortals bore witness to these events with a mixture of fear, respect, and reverence. Fishermen, warriors, and blacksmiths had all been taught by Ogun, and they assisted in fortifying the settlements, wielding weapons crafted by divine hands. Yet even with their skill, they could only influence a fraction of the battlefield. The clash of gods was far beyond human comprehension. Villagers recounted how the river seemed alive, rising and falling as if it had its own mind, while sparks from Ogun's forge danced across the water, hissing and steam-filled, as if fire itself were challenging the ocean. The first direct encounter between the two gods was subtle yet significant. Ogun, wielding a hammer glowing red-hot from his forge, struck the surface of the river to create a wave of molten iron. Olokun responded with a surge of water that twisted and surged, attempting to wash away both the iron and the god himself. The collision created a violent explosion of steam, spray, and molten fragments, shaping a temporary battlefield where land met sea. The clash demonstrated that neither god could dominate the other outright. Their powers were equally matched, though expressed differently. Ogun's might lay in skill, ingenuity, and mastery over iron. Olokun's strength resided in patience, unpredictability, and command over the vast waters. As the day progressed, neither deity gained a decisive victory, but the human settlements had been tested. Villagers learned to respect both the land and the sea, understanding that survival required balance and adaptation. They reinforced homes, dug channels to control floodwaters, and devised strategies to protect themselves from future skirmishes. These lessons, imparted through divine conflict, shaped human civilization along the delta, ensuring that mortals were prepared for the escalating struggles between Ogun and Olokun. By evening, the waters had receded slightly, and Ogun, standing among the fortified structures he had created, surveyed the battlefield. Though victorious in resisting the first surge of Olokun's power, he knew this was only the beginning. The god of the deep was patient, and his response would grow stronger with each encounter. Olokun, hidden beneath the waves, observed the results of his initial assault. He recognized Ogun's skill and foresight, and though his own power had not yet been fully revealed, he was satisfied with the lessons imparted to mortals and the demonstration of his own might. The first skirmish marked a turning point in the saga. It revealed not only the immense power of both gods, but also the interdependence of land and sea, fire and water. Ogun had proven that ingenuity, craftsmanship, and courage could withstand the fury of the ocean, while Olokun showed that patience, strategy, and control over the natural elements were forces to be reckoned with. This encounter would be remembered by mortals as the day when the god's presence was undeniable, and the stage was set for the larger battles that were soon to come. As night fell, the river delta lay scarred but standing, a testament to the power of Ogun and the subtle warning of Olokun. Both gods retreated to their domains to prepare, strategize, and anticipate the next moves. The world had witnessed the beginning of a divine confrontation, and the echoes of the first skirmish would resonate across generations, immortalized in the myths and stories of the Yoruba people. Chapter 5: Forging Weapons of War. In the aftermath of the first skirmish, Ogun retreated to his forges atop the mountains and along the fertile plains where rivers cut through the land. The battle with Olokun had been fierce, yet inconclusive, revealing the depths of his rival's power. It was clear to Ogun that the conflict was only beginning, and that mortal hands alone would not suffice to defend the settlements and fortresses he had helped establish. To prepare for the coming encounters, Ogun devoted himself to the sacred art that defined him, the forging of weapons, tools, and instruments that could channel his divine strength. The forges blazed brighter than ever, flames licking the sky and sparks dancing like fireflies in the twilight. Ogun struck the molten iron with his hammer, each blow resonating with the might of mountains and the rhythm of thunder. As he worked, the god infused every weapon with divine energy, embedding not only strength but also intelligence into the metal. Swords became sharp enough to cut through even the scales of sea monsters. Spears balanced perfectly to pierce currents as well as armor, and shields that could withstand both fire and water were hammered into existence. Each creation bore the mark of Ogun's ingenuity and foresight, ready for the next confrontation with Olokun. Mortals who approached Ogun's forge were awestruck by the sheer power and artistry on display. Blacksmiths, warriors, and villagers alike watched as molten metal transformed under the god's hands. Some dared to touch the tools, guided by Ogun's instruction, and felt a surge of strength and purpose flow into them. Others simply observed, absorbing the lessons of skill, patience, and strategy that the forge offered. For Ogun, the act of forging was not merely about creating weapons, it was about preparing humanity to face the unpredictable forces of nature and the wrath of a god whose domain spanned the oceans. Among the weapons forged, there were those designed specifically to counter Olokun's abilities. Spears tipped with enchanted iron could pierce deep beneath the water's surface, while nets of interwoven metal could trap creatures of the sea. Shields were imbued with the power to repel water surges and redirect currents, giving mortals the upper hand when defending their villages. Ogun's foresight extended even to tools for construction, allowing humans to build structures resilient to floods, storms, and tidal surges. Every item was both practical and sacred, a tangible embodiment of divine guidance and protection. Yet, forging these weapons was not without challenges. The flames of Ogun's forge required constant tending, fueled by the energy of the earth and the resolve of the god himself. Each strike of the hammer demanded precision, strength, and patience, for even a single misstep could shatter the metal or weaken its enchantment. The god worked tirelessly, day and night, guided by both instinct and foresight. The forge became a cathedral of creation, where fire and iron, skill and divinity converged to prepare for the inevitable clash with Olokun. Meanwhile, Olokun was aware of Ogun's preparations. From the depths of the ocean, he observed the rising fortresses, the human settlements strengthened with divine craftsmanship, and the new weapons being forged in molten iron. The sea god's patience was tested, yet he remained calculating. He summoned currents and sea creatures to probe the defenses, testing their resilience and noting every advantage and weakness. Olokun understood that the next encounter would be more than a simple clash. It would be a war of ingenuity, strength, and strategy, where each god's creations could determine victory or defeat. Ogun, aware that Olokun would strike again, continued to innovate. He created weapons that could be wielded by mortals, imbuing them with fragments of his divine power. Swords that shimmered with light to cut through shadows beneath the water, axes forged for both combat and construction, and spears capable of channeling the god's strength, all took shape under the relentless hammering of Ogun's hands. Mortals trained tirelessly, learning to use these divine creations in preparation for the battles that were sure to come. Every strike of the hammer, every shaping of molten iron was a lesson in resilience, strategy, and the understanding that survival depended on balance between the land and sea. The forging process itself became legendary. Sparks from the anvil flew like stars across the sky, and molten iron flowed like rivers of fire, shaping not only weapons, but also the very destiny of those who would wield them. Ogun's presence at the forge inspired reverence, fear, and awe. Mortals began to understand the sacred nature of craftsmanship, that through skill and dedication, they could participate in the ongoing divine struggle. Each weapon carried a story, a purpose, and a fragment of Ogun's essence, ready to confront Olokun's tidal might when the time came. By the end of this period of intense creation, Ogun had completed an arsenal worthy of the coming conflicts. His forge, now legendary among mortals and gods alike, had produced weapons capable of withstanding storms, currents, and the raw power of the ocean itself. Mortals, armed and trained, stood ready to defend their homes, villages, and the land they had come to inhabit. Ogun, gazing over the array of weapons and tools, felt a surge of pride and determination. The next encounter with Olokun would test all he had prepared, but he knew that both human ingenuity and divine craftsmanship would be formidable. Thus, the forging of weapons of war was complete, marking a critical turning point in the saga. Ogun's forges not only strengthened the land and its people, but also set the stage for the next phase of the conflict. The confrontation on the waters, where ingenuity and strategy would be as vital as raw power. The stage was set, the players ready, and the world braced for the escalating clash between fire and water, land and sea, Ogun and Olokun. Chapter 6: The Battle at Sea. The tension that had been simmering for months between Ogun, god of iron and war, and Olokun, god of the deep, finally erupted into an open confrontation on the waters. The first skirmish had tested the defenses of mortals. The forging of weapons had prepared the land, and now the battlefield shifted to the ocean, where Olokun's dominion was absolute. Waves crashed like living mountains, tides surged with force, and the sea itself seemed to pulse with anticipation as both gods prepared for an unprecedented clash. Ogun stood at the edge of the coastline, his hammer in hand, and a collection of newly forged weapons at his side. His eyes scanned the horizon, where the ocean churned unnaturally, as if foreshadowing the coming battle. The god of iron had spent countless hours forging tools capable of withstanding the might of Olokun's waters, imbuing them with divine power and resilience. Mortals, armed and ready, lined the shore, prepared to act under Ogun's guidance. The tension was palpable. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first strike. From the depths of the ocean, Olokun rose, his form shimmering with the hues of deep water, vast and intimidating. His presence caused the waves to rise dramatically, swallowing small islands and sending torrents toward the shore. Sea creatures of all sizes, serpents, fish, and mythical beasts swirled around him, ready to enforce his will. Olokun's gaze, calm yet penetrating, fell upon Ogun and the humans at the shoreline. For the first time, the full scale of his power was revealed to mortals. The sea was alive, intelligent, and merciless when provoked. The battle began with a display of raw elemental power. Ogun struck the earth with his hammer, sending molten iron projectiles and fortified barricades into the surf. Waves crashed against these defenses, but many weapons, empowered by divine craftsmanship, held firm. The clash created explosive bursts of steam and spray, a deadly dance of fire and water that illustrated the immense power of both gods. Mortals stood in awe and terror, realizing that they were witnessing not only a battle of gods, but also a war that would reshape the balance between land and sea. Olokun responded strategically, manipulating currents and tides with precision. Massive waves surged toward the shore, seeking to crush Ogun's fortifications and sweep the humans into the deep. Sea creatures lunged at the coastal defenders, some forming living barriers, while others attempted to breach the lines. Yet Ogun anticipated these moves. With deft strikes of his hammer and the deployment of his enchanted weapons, he repelled the waves, redirected currents, and struck at Olokun's agents in the water. Each attack was a calculated measure, blending strength with intelligence, revealing that Ogun's power lay not only in might, but in foresight and strategy. The battle escalated as the two gods engaged directly. Ogun swung his hammer with divine precision, creating shockwaves that rippled across the water's surface, throwing sea creatures off balance and disrupting Olokun's control of the currents. Olokun retaliated by summoning whirlpools and tidal surges, twisting the water into forms that threatened to engulf Ogun entirely. Sparks from molten iron hissed upon contact with the water, steam rising in thick clouds that obscured vision and intensified the chaos. Mortals, guided by Ogun's instruction, used the enchanted weapons to defend themselves, fighting alongside the god in a coordinated effort that showcased both divine and human ingenuity. Despite the ferocity of the confrontation, neither god could claim absolute victory. Ogun's weapons and fortifications held against Olokun's relentless assault, while Olokun's command of the sea remained unchallenged. Each move, each counter, was a testament to the balance between fire and water, land and sea, strength and strategy. The battle continued for hours, with neither side yielding, both testing the limits of their powers while shaping the battlefield itself. Amidst the chaos, mortals observed lessons that would be invaluable for generations to come. They learned the importance of preparation, coordination, and respect for the forces of nature. Villages along the coast fortified themselves with new techniques inspired by Ogun's guidance, while sailors and fishermen gained a renewed understanding of the ocean's power. The gods' battle, though terrifying, imparted wisdom, revealing that survival required both courage and humility. As night fell, the waves calmed slightly, leaving the shoreline battered but standing. Ogun retreated to the safety of the land, surveying the results of the day's confrontation. Though victorious in repelling Olokun's initial assault, he understood that this was only the beginning. Olokun, still present in the depths, observed the resilience of the mortals and the ingenuity of Ogun's weapons, silently plotting his next move. Both gods knew that the coming encounters would escalate further, testing their power, strategy, and endurance. The battle at sea marked a pivotal moment in the saga. It revealed the true scope of the gods' abilities, the strengths and vulnerabilities of each domain, and the potential for mortal involvement in divine conflicts. Ogun's mastery of iron and strategy had been proven, while Olokun's command over the oceans was undeniable. The battlefield had shifted from land to sea, and the stage was set for the next phase of the war, a confrontation that would combine cunning, elemental power, and divine foresight, shaping the destiny of both gods and humans alike. Thus, the clash between Ogun and Olokun intensified, signaling that the war was far from over. The first open battle had been fought, but the deeper struggles of strategy, cunning, and elemental mastery were only beginning. The world, caught between fire and water, land and sea, would soon witness the full extent of divine power as Ogun and Olokun prepared for the escalating conflict that would define the mythic saga of the Yoruba pantheon. Chapter 7: The Tide Turns. The aftermath of the battle at sea left both gods and mortals contemplating the fragile balance between land and water. Ogun had proven the strength of his forge, his weapons, and his strategy, yet Olokun remained an unstoppable force beneath the waves. The first confrontation had been inconclusive, leaving tension lingering like the salty mist along the coastline. It was in this uneasy calm that the tide began to turn, signaling a shift in the war between fire and water, iron and ocean. Olokun, Lord of the Deep, retreated to the darkest trenches of his realm, drawing upon the full power of the ocean. From this hidden vantage point, he began to strategize, sending currents and creatures to probe the weaknesses of Ogun's fortifications. Unlike the previous skirmish, Olokun now employed subtlety and cunning over brute force. Whales and serpents were guided into narrow passages to test the humans' defenses, while whirlpools and riptides targeted the forges along the coast. Each maneuver was precise, designed to force Ogun into reactive measures, revealing his strengths and exposing vulnerabilities. On land, Ogun sensed the subtle changes in the balance of power. The surges of the sea were no longer random. They were calculated, deliberate, and adaptive. Recognizing Olokun's intelligence, Ogun called upon the mortals trained under his guidance. Together, they fortified settlements, adjusted river barriers, and tested the resilience of weapons against the unpredictable tides. The god himself forged new tools that could counter the flowing currents, crafting harpoons, weighted nets, and reinforced shields capable of resisting even the strongest surge. Every action was a lesson in adaptability and foresight. The first signs of the tide turning manifested in the skirmishes along river mouths and shallow coastal waters. Olokun's creatures became more coordinated, moving in patterns that were difficult to predict. Sea serpents and fish struck simultaneously, while hidden currents threatened to pull human defenders into the depths. Yet Ogun and his mortal allies adapted quickly, using the weapons and strategies forged in the previous chapter. Molten iron was cast into the water to deter attacks. Fortified walls, redirected currents, and clever traps disrupted the rhythm of Olokun's forces. With each encounter, the balance of the battle shifted, proving that preparation and ingenuity could counter even the raw power of the ocean. The turning point, however, came not from brute force, but from ingenuity. Ogun devised a strategy that leveraged both land and sea, exploiting the edges of Olokun's domain. Using channels, levees, and strategically placed barriers, he guided the currents in ways that confused and slowed Olokun's creatures. Mortals, empowered by divine weapons, coordinated attacks with precision, striking at the right moment to drive back the sea god's minions. Olokun, observing these tactics, realized that the battlefield had evolved. The humans themselves had become instruments in Ogun's strategy, bridging the gap between divine and mortal effort. Olokun, however, was not defeated. The god of the deep adapted swiftly, creating new currents, calling forth hidden leviathans, and manipulating the tides to reclaim control. The battle became a dynamic contest of wits and strength, a dance of elemental forces where the ocean tested the ingenuity of iron and fire. Waves rose and fell unpredictably. Molten projectiles hissed upon contact with water, and the sky itself seemed to react to the escalating conflict. Lightning striking intermittently as if the heavens acknowledged the clash of gods. Mortals, caught between these titanic forces, learned resilience and unity. They coordinated defenses, shared knowledge, and adapted their tactics in response to both Ogun and Olokun's maneuvers. Villages became fortresses, forges transformed into defensive bastions, and human ingenuity intertwined with divine power. The tide turning was not merely about Olokun's advantage, was about the shifting strategies of both sides, where victory required cleverness, courage, and the ability to anticipate the other's moves. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the coastal waters bore the scars of the day's battles. Some villages had been damaged, fortifications breached, yet the mortals endured, strengthened by the guidance of Ogun and the lessons imparted by Olokun's relentless testing. The god of the deep withdrew slightly, acknowledging the resilience and adaptability of both humans and the god of iron. Ogun, standing on the shore, recognized that the battle was far from over, yet he felt a surge of satisfaction at the mortal ingenuity and divine foresight displayed. The tide turning marked a crucial moment in the saga. The realization that the war between Ogun and Olokun was not merely about raw power, but strategy, adaptation, and the integration of mortals into divine conflict. Each encounter refined the skills of humans, honed the abilities of the gods, and reshaped the battlefield itself. The lessons learned would echo through future skirmishes, influencing the next stages of the war, where cunning, preparation, and the clever use of both land and sea would determine the fate of the world. Thus, the battle evolved beyond simple confrontations. The tide turns demonstrated that victory was not guaranteed by might alone. Intelligence, adaptability, and cooperation were equally important. Ogun and Olokun had both asserted dominance in different ways, yet the war continued, setting the stage for even greater confrontations, larger strategies, and the inevitable escalation of divine warfare that would test gods and mortals alike. Chapter 8: Secrets of the Deep. After the tide had turned, both gods withdrew to reassess their strategies. Ogun retreated to his mountain forges to repair, reforging weapons and planning the next moves, while Olokun sank into the abyssal depths of the ocean, where sunlight never reached, to contemplate the secrets hidden within his realm. The secrets of the deep were many: caverns filled with treasures, enchanted waters that amplified power, and creatures that had remained unseen for millennia. Olokun's domain was vast, ancient, and filled with mysteries that few, mortal or divine, could comprehend. From the darkest trenches, Olokun summoned creatures of incredible power. Leviathans, enormous serpents with scales harder than iron, glided silently through the currents. Schools of fish formed patterns to confuse and misdirect, while deep sea beasts, glowing with bioluminescent light, created illusions to mislead enemies. The god himself had knowledge of the currents and tides that could manipulate entire coastlines, shift the paths of rivers, and create underwater barriers that were impossible for mortals to breach. Every secret was a weapon waiting to be unleashed, and Olokun prepared them meticulously. Meanwhile, Ogun had recognized the importance of understanding these secrets. He sent scouts, both divine and mortal, to explore the rivers, estuaries, and coastal waters, seeking insight into Olokun's domain. These scouts returned with knowledge of hidden currents, submerged rocks, and natural formations that could be exploited. Ogun used this information to forge specialized weapons designed for underwater combat: harpoons with enchanted tips, nets reinforced with divine iron, and tridents capable of controlling localized water currents. His forges glowed day and night, reflecting the urgency of preparation, for he knew that the next encounter would not be on land, but deep within Olokun's territory. The god of the deep observed these preparations with a mixture of admiration and wariness. Ogun's ingenuity was formidable. His ability to adapt and incorporate knowledge into weaponry challenged Olokun in ways that mere force could not. To counter this, Olokun revealed some of the secrets of the deep. Hidden grottos were opened to reveal currents that could drag ships into whirlpools, and submerged reefs were positioned to trap unsuspecting intruders. Whales and sea serpents were trained to coordinate attacks with precision, striking at key points where Ogun's forces were strongest. The ocean became a labyrinth of danger, each secret a test of courage and intelligence. The The first probe into these secrets began when Ogun sent a small contingent of mortals equipped with newly forged weapons to explore a coastal trench rumored to hold an underwater passage. As they descended, the currents shifted violently, threatening to sweep them into the abyss. Yet, the weapons, forged with divine insight, allowed them to navigate partially, revealing the ocean's hidden traps while avoiding the worst dangers. From the safety of the shore, Ogun observed and adjusted his strategies, learning how Olokun's secrets could be countered. It became clear that victory would depend not only on strength, but also on knowledge and cunning. Simultaneously, Olokun used illusions to test the resolve of the humans. Ships appeared to be stranded, creatures seemed to emerge from nowhere, and currents created phantom whirlpools. Mortals panicked at first, but guided by Ogun's wisdom and divine weapons, they learned to distinguish reality from trickery. These encounters revealed a deeper truth. The secrets of the deep were as much about perception as power. Only those who could adapt, analyze, and respond intelligently would survive. Ogun's strategy evolved to incorporate this, training humans not only to fight, but to think, to anticipate, and to respond to the ocean's unpredictable nature. By mid-cycle, the tension reached a critical point. Both gods understood that the mastery of hidden knowledge could tip the balance in their favor. Ogun's forges produced tools designed for reconnaissance and exploration, while Olokun manipulated the terrain of the deep, creating new challenges for any who dared enter. The stage was set for a confrontation where secrets, intelligence, and preparation would be as crucial as raw power. Each god was shaping the battlefield, using their respective domain to test the other, preparing for an inevitable clash that would determine dominance over the seas and the coastal lands. As the sun set over the horizon, waves shimmered with the reflection of molten metal and the subtle glow of deep-sea creatures. Mortals, inspired by Ogun's guidance, had adapted to the challenges of the tides and currents, understanding that survival required respect for both gods. Olokun, observing from the depths, acknowledged the ingenuity of his adversary. The ocean's secrets had been revealed in part, yet many remained hidden, holding potential for both defense and devastating assault. The secrets of the deep thus represented a turning point in the saga. They highlighted the evolving nature of the conflict. Power alone could not guarantee victory. Knowledge, adaptability, and clever utilization of the environment were essential. Ogun and Olokun had entered a phase where strategy, insight, and mastery of their respective domains would define the outcome of future battles. Mortals were no longer mere spectators, they were participants, their survival and skill intertwined with the outcome of the divine struggle. By the end of this chapter, the battlefield had expanded beyond the visible world. Ogun and his humans were prepared for deeper incursions, while Olokun had reinforced his dominion with hidden defenses and deadly secrets. The clash was no longer only about territory, yet was a contest of wit, resilience, and the intelligent use of power. The next phase of the war promised to be even more perilous, for both gods now understood that victory required more than brute force. It demanded foresight, adaptation, and the ability to uncover and exploit the secrets of the deep. Chapter 9: The Wrath of Olokun. After the humans and Ogun had successfully navigated parts of Olokun's hidden domain, the sea god's patience finally reached its limit. No longer content to merely test his opponent, or conceal his secrets, Olokun unleashed his wrath in full force. The waters began to churn violently, transforming from placid waves into towering walls of relentless fury. Storm clouds gathered above the ocean, darkening the sky and striking fear into the hearts of mortals. Lightning danced across the horizon, reflecting ominously on the glistening surfaces of Ogun's forged weapons, as if nature itself had taken sides in this divine struggle. Olokun's assault began subtly, with currents growing unpredictable, tides rising higher than ever, and deep sea beasts appearing without warning. Schools of venomous fish swarmed the shore, while massive serpents and leviathans attacked from the depths. The god's fury was strategic as well as raw, targeting both the fortifications and the humans defending them. No settlement was safe, for Olokun's wrath did not discriminate. It swept across the coastline, demonstrating the immense, untamed power of the ocean. Waves crashed with such force that even Ogun's iron defenses groaned under the pressure, threatening to collapse under relentless pressure. Ogun, recognizing the severity of the attack, rallied both mortals and his forged arsenal. Weapons imbued with divine power glimmered in the storm, and human warriors trained tirelessly to coordinate attacks and defend the settlements. Ogun himself wielded his hammer with precision, striking molten iron into the waves to counter Olokun's surges. Each blow sent shockwaves through the water, disrupting currents and scattering attacking creatures. Though the god of the deep's power remained immense, it became evident that this battle would test endurance, strategy, and resilience more than simple strength. The battle intensified as Olokun summoned massive tidal waves, pushing coastal defenses to their limits. Entire sections of land were temporarily submerged, forcing mortals to fight both the elements and the attacking sea creatures. Whirlpool formations appeared unexpectedly, dragging away those who were unprepared. Ogun's strategy relied on the clever placement of weapons and fortifications. Harpoons and tridents were deployed to guide the currents and protect villages. Despite their best efforts, the raw fury of Olokun created chaos that neither mortals nor Ogun could fully control, demonstrating that the god's wrath was an unstoppable force of nature. Within the chaos, Olokun displayed cunning beyond sheer destruction. He used illusions and deceptive currents to isolate groups of defenders, pulling them into traps or toward dangerous waters. Mortals, guided by Ogun, quickly learned to distinguish real threats from trickery. But the psychological impact of the god's wrath weighed heavily. The storm was not just a physical battle, it was a test of courage, intelligence, and willpower. The ocean god's fury forced the defenders to adapt continuously, learning on the fly how to survive against an overwhelming, omnipresent force. Amid the tumult, Ogun's ingenuity became critical. He manipulated the molten iron and forged barriers to redirect waves, create temporary safe zones, and strike at key targets among Olokun's summoned creatures. Mortals assisted in these efforts, their coordination and skill amplified by the divine energy infused in the weapons. Each small victory, repelling a leviathan, navigating a whirlpool, or breaking a swarm of venomous fish, strengthened the resolve of the humans and showcased the effectiveness of Ogun's preparations. The clash of divine wrath and divine strategy was evident, and though the battle was brutal, it highlighted the growing partnership between gods and mortals. The peak of Olokun's wrath came when he summoned a colossal tidal surge, intended to wash away the entire coastline and end the resistance once and for all. Waves towered higher than mountains, and the roar of the ocean echoed like thunder across the land. Ogun, sensing the magnitude of the threat, combined all his forces, both mortal and divine, to repel the onslaught. Shields, reinforced with enchanted iron, and harpoons imbued with divine energy intercepted the wave's force, creating a protective barrier. The molten iron struck the surge, causing explosions of steam and water, temporarily halting the momentum of the tide. Mortals, inspired and guided by divine strategy, played a crucial role in stabilizing the front, turning the potential disaster into a tactical stalemate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the wrathful display of Olokun subsided slightly. Though the battle had not ended, and the god's fury still lingered in the currents, a temporary calm settled over the coast. Ogun, standing amidst the scorched sand, battered fortifications, and exhausted mortals, recognized that the resilience and coordination of both humans and gods had prevented complete destruction. Olokun, observing from the depths, acknowledged the tenacity and adaptability of his adversary. The god's wrath had been unleashed, yet the battle remained unresolved, setting the stage for further confrontations. The wrath of Olokun was more than a display of power. It was a lesson in endurance, strategy, and the integration of mortal skill into divine conflict. The clash highlighted that strength alone was insufficient against a cunning and adaptable opponent. Ogun's foresight, preparation, and collaboration with mortals had countered much of Olokun's fury, proving that intelligence, ingenuity, and courage were equally potent forces in the ongoing war. By the end of this chapter, both gods understood that future battles would demand even greater creativity, resilience, and strategy. Olokun's wrath had reshaped the battlefield, tested the limits of both mortals and divine forces, and forced Ogun to refine his approach. The conflict continued to escalate, preparing the stage for the next pivotal chapter, Chapter 10, The Clash of Titans, where the ultimate confrontation between Ogun and Olokun would approach its peak. Chapter 10, The Clash of Titans, the moment of reckoning had arrived. After countless skirmishes, strategic maneuvers, and displays of raw power, Ogun and Olokun finally faced each other in the ultimate confrontation, the Clash of Titans. The ocean's surface had become a battleground, where molten iron met surging waves, and the sky itself seemed to crack under the force of divine energies. Every element, the land, the sea, and even the heavens participated in this epic encounter as the two gods unleashed their full might in a display of unimaginable power. Ogun stepped forward, his hammer glowing with molten energy, armor gleaming under the stormy sky. Behind him, mortals armed with enchanted weapons stood in formation, ready to follow the guidance of their divine patron. Each human had learned lessons of resilience, skill, and adaptation through the previous battles, their courage amplified by Ogun's divine presence. The battlefield stretched across jagged cliffs, crashing waves, and sandy shores, providing both opportunity and danger for each move. From the depths of the ocean, Olokun emerged in his full, terrifying form. Scales glimmering with the colors of abyssal waters, eyes glowing like deep sea lanterns, and tentacles and fins that churned the waters violently. He represented the raw, unpredictable fury of the deep. The sea itself responded to his emotions. Tidal waves rose and fell, currents twisted unnaturally, and ocean creatures gathered like a living army. Olokun's presence alone created chaos, Yet there was intelligence in his furious, strategic mind, guiding every surge and strike. The clash began with a titanic exchange of elemental force. Ogun's hammer struck the water with a shockwave that splintered waves and disrupted Olokun's control over the currents. Molten iron and enchanted harpoons flew through the air, piercing the churning waters and striking sea beasts. Olokun retaliated by summoning colossal waves, whirlpools, and swirling vortexes designed to engulf mortals and even threaten Ogun himself. Lightning crackled across the sky, and thunder roared in harmony with the impact of divine blows, as if nature itself was declaring the significance of this battle. Mortals played a crucial role in the conflict. Utilizing the weapons forged by Ogun, they navigated treacherous waters, reinforced barriers, and coordinated attacks with precision. Their understanding of the battlefield, honed through previous encounters, allowed them to act as extensions of Ogun's will. Every harpoon cast, every shield lifted, every maneuver executed contributed to blunting the force of Olokun's assault. For the first time, it became clear that the divine struggle was intertwined with mortal courage and strategy, a collaboration that could shape the outcome of a clash between titans. The battle escalated further when the gods engaged directly. Ogun's hammer met Olokun's tidal surges in a series of cataclysmic impacts, sending shockwaves through both land and sea. Waves rose as high as mountains, crashing into the molten barriers, while molten iron hissed violently upon contact with the water, creating clouds of steam and blinding spray. Every strike was met with a counter, every movement anticipated and challenged, illustrating the perfect balance of power and strategy. It was a dance of destruction, a symphony of divine energy, clashing against divine energy. In the midst of the battle, the landscape itself bore the marks of their struggle. Cliffs were shattered, sands scorched, and rivers redirected by the sheer force of their blows. Olokun summoned sea monsters to block attacks and disrupt formations, while Ogun used clever tactics to redirect water, control flow, and create zones of advantage for mortals. The engagement was more than brute force, it was a war of wits, adaptation, and the creative application of each god's dominion. Each strike, each maneuver reflected centuries of wisdom, foresight, and mastery over the elements. The peak of the clash came as both gods unleashed their ultimate powers simultaneously. Ogun struck the ocean with his mightiest blow, sending molten iron crashing into the depths and creating a surge that disrupted the tides. Olokun, in retaliation, generated a colossal maelstrom, threatening to engulf both gods and their armies. The collision of energies shook the heavens, split the waves, and illuminated the battlefield with a blinding fusion of fire and water. Mortals held their ground, guided by divine insight, surviving against forces that could easily have annihilated them. As the storm began to subside, both gods paused, acknowledging the ferocity and skill of their opponent. Though neither could claim complete victory, the battle had reshaped the battlefield, tested the limits of strength, strategy, and resilience, and marked a turning point in the ongoing war. Mortals had proven themselves indispensable, their courage and adaptability intertwined with divine effort, demonstrating that the fate of the land and sea depended on both gods and humans. The clash of titans concluded without a decisive victor, yet it set the stage for the final chapters of the saga. Ogun's mastery of iron, strategy, and mortal collaboration had countered much of Olokun's overwhelming power, while Olokun's command of the ocean and cunning demonstrated that true victory required more than raw force. The battle had exhausted both sides, but it also illuminated the path forward. The coming engagements would demand even greater ingenuity, coordination, and courage. Thus, the epic confrontation underscored the scale of divine conflict. The world, caught between molten iron and oceanic fury, had witnessed the immense power and intelligence of Ogun and Olokun. The clash of titans had altered the balance, setting the stage for the next pivotal chapter. Chapter 11: The Turning of the War, where the tide of battle would shift in unexpected ways and the ultimate resolution began to emerge. Chapter 11: The Turning of the War. After the titanic confrontation in the Clash of Titans, both Ogun and Olokun withdrew to reassess their strategies. The battle had tested the limits of their power, but neither could claim decisive victory. The landscape had been reshaped, coastal villages battered, rivers redirected, and the sea itself restless and unpredictable. Yet within this chaos, the war began to turn. Guided by cunning, adaptation, and an evolving understanding of the mortal realm's role in divine conflict, Ogun retreated to his mountain forges, not to rest, but to innovate. He studied the patterns of Olokun's assaults, analyzing currents, tidal movements, and the behavior of summoned sea creatures. Drawing upon ancient knowledge and divine insight, he forged weapons specifically designed to counter the ocean god's might. Harpoons tipped with enchanted iron capable of piercing leviathan scales, nets that could entangle even the largest sea serpent, and shields that absorbed the kinetic force of crashing waves. Each weapon reflected not only brute strength, but also ingenuity, a testament to Ogun's mastery of iron and strategy. At the same time, Olokun, aware of Ogun's preparations, deepened his command of the secrets of the deep. He manipulated underwater currents to create ambush zones, summoned monstrous leviathans to patrol hidden trenches, and crafted illusions to deceive both gods and mortals. The sea became an ever-changing battlefield, alive with intelligence, cunning, and wrath. Every wave, every current, and every sea creature was a tool in his arsenal. Olokun's focus was clear: to overwhelm Ogun through unpredictability and the sheer, calculated fury of the ocean. The turning point came when Ogun recognized that victory required more than weapons. It required strategy and unity. He rallied the mortals who had survived previous battles, training them to operate in tandem with divine power. Humans became scouts, archers, and engineers, using knowledge of terrain and water patterns to support the god of iron. With precision and coordination, they executed plans that maximized the effectiveness of Ogun's weapons while minimizing exposure to Olokun's wrath. Mortals were no longer mere bystanders. They were active participants, pivotal in shaping the outcome of the war. Olokun responded by intensifying his attacks, creating massive tidal surges, and deploying his most formidable sea creatures. Yet even in the face of overwhelming power, Ogun's foresight and preparation allowed for an effective counter. Harpoons flew in perfect arcs, striking leviathans before they could reach the shore. Nets entangled massive serpents, and strategically placed barriers redirected destructive waves. Each maneuver highlighted the evolving intelligence on the battlefield, showing that the tide of war could shift not only with power, but with cleverness and coordination. As the weeks passed, the dynamic of the war shifted further. Olokun's relentless fury began to lose its effect against the combined efforts of Ogun and his mortals. While still a formidable opponent, the sea god faced an adversary who anticipated his moves, adapted to his tricks, and turned the very currents against him. Human ingenuity, guided by divine insight, played a crucial role in tipping the balance. What had once been a one-sided display of oceanic dominance became a contest of intellect, strategy, and endurance. In a decisive moment, Ogun lured Olokun into a carefully prepared trap, a narrow channel fortified with molten iron barriers and enchanted nets designed to neutralize the sea god's strengths while exploiting his predictable reliance on currents. As Olokun surged forward, confident in his command over the tides, Ogun and the humans executed their plan flawlessly. Waves were redirected, creatures were trapped, and Olokun found himself constrained, struggling against forces he had not anticipated. The once overwhelming power of the ocean now met the ingenuity and preparation of iron, fire, and mortal collaboration. This battle demonstrated that the turning of the war was not merely a matter of physical dominance. Ogun's victory came from foresight, adaptability, and strategic coordination with mortals. The war had evolved from a chaotic display of strength into a calculated series of engagements, where intelligence, cunning, and preparation determined the outcome. Mortals, empowered and guided by Ogun, became instrumental in the balance of power, showing that even gods could not win without considering the mortal element. By the end of this chapter, Olokun, though still formidable, had been forced into a defensive posture. Ogun, reinforced by his allies and enhanced by divine weapons, gained the upper hand. The tide had turned, signaling the approach of the final confrontation. The war was nearing its climax, and both gods understood that the next battles would demand every ounce of power, strategy, and resilience they could muster. The world, caught between molten iron and oceanic fury, braced for the ultimate resolution. The turning of the war marked a pivotal shift in the saga. It highlighted the importance of preparation, intelligence, and unity, proving that the greatest power is often wielded not through force alone, but through cleverness, coordination, and the harmonious integration of mortal and divine efforts. The stage was set for the final chapter, Chapter 12, the Final Confrontation, where Ogun and Olokun would face each other in a battle that would decide the fate of the seas, the land, and all who lived between them. Chapter 12, the Final Confrontation. The time had come. After countless battles, strategies, and displays of divine power, Ogun and Olokun faced each other for the final confrontation. The air was thick with tension, charged with the combined energies of iron and water. Waves crashed violently against the shoreline. Molten rivers of Ogun's forging lava snaked into the sea, and the sky roared with the fury of a storm that reflected the magnitude of the impending clash. This was the culmination of a war that had tested gods and mortals alike, a battle that would determine the ultimate balance between land, sea, and human civilization. Ogun, standing firm on a jagged cliff, held his mighty hammer aloft. Its surface glowed with the heat of the forge, humming with divine energy. Behind him, mortals equipped with enchanted weapons prepared for battle, their training and courage honed through previous encounters with Olokun's forces. Each human had become more than a soldier. They were extensions of Ogun's will, their resilience, foresight, and ingenuity critical to the strategy that would face the god of the deep. This was a confrontation where every participant, mortal and divine, mattered. From the depths, Olokun rose with a presence that commanded the ocean itself. His eyes glowed like abyssal lanterns, and his scales reflected the fury of the stormy waters. Tentacles, fins, and monstrous sea beasts swirled around him, creating a living, writhing army of the deep. Currents twisted and surged, tides rose higher than mountains, and the ocean churned with relentless force. Olokun's power was overwhelming, yet calculated. Each wave, each strike, was an expression of strategy as well as raw might. The clash began with devastating force. Ogun struck the water with his hammer, sending molten iron into the waves and creating explosions of steam and fire. The sea responded with enormous tidal surges, pulling both mortals and elements of the terrain into its grip. Leviathans and serpents surged forward, testing the defenses of Ogun's human allies, while strategically guided currents threatened to engulf the god of iron himself. Each move was countered by the other, creating a battle that was both chaotic and precise, raw and intelligent. Mortals played a pivotal role in this final confrontation. Using knowledge gained from prior battles, they maneuvered through the treacherous terrain, striking at sea creatures, redirecting currents, and reinforcing Ogun's defenses. Enchanted harpoons pierced Leviathan scales, nets entangled sea monsters, and coordinated formations allowed them to survive attacks that would have crushed unprepared forces. Their courage and ingenuity demonstrated that divine conflict was inseparable from human involvement, a partnership essential to tipping the scales in Ogun's favor. Olokun, recognizing the threat posed by mortals, intensified his assaults. Tidal waves swirled unpredictably, colossal sea beasts struck from every direction, and illusions masked the true movements of his army. The god of the deep unleashed every secret of the ocean, from hidden trenches to whirlpools, testing the limits of mortal and divine endurance. Yet Ogun anticipated these moves. Channels of molten iron guided the flow of water, strategically placed barriers, and clever maneuvers trapped some of Olokun's most dangerous creatures. Every strike, every counter, reflected years of preparation, divine insight, and careful coordination. The climax approached as both gods unleashed their ultimate powers. Ogun summoned a massive pillar of molten metal, forging a path of fire through the churning waves, while Olokun raised a titanic wave infused with the fury of the ocean's deepest currents. The collision was cataclysmic. Water and molten iron clashed with explosive force, sending shockwaves across land and sea. Mortals clung to their positions, guiding attacks and maintaining defenses, becoming indispensable participants in the decisive moment of this divine war. The sky erupted in lightning and thunder, marking the battle as one for the ages. In a final act of divine ingenuity, Ogun exploited the very secrets Olokun had used against him. By redirecting currents and using enchanted iron to stabilize and counter the wave's energy, he created a zone of controlled chaos, neutralizing the ocean god's advantage. Within this zone, mortals struck decisively, and Ogun delivered a strike that shattered the tide's momentum. Olokun, though still powerful, was forced into retreat. His forces scattered, and his control of the battlefield diminished. The strategic use of knowledge, preparation, and cooperation had tipped the balance, marking the turning point that would decide the war. As the waters calmed and the molten flows receded, Ogun stood victorious, yet humble. Olokun, defeated but not destroyed, sank back into the depths, acknowledging the god of iron's mastery and the courage of mortals. The final confrontation had not annihilated the sea god. but it had established Ogun as the dominant force, protector of the lands and the mortal realm. The battlefield bore scars of the epic struggle, but it also demonstrated the harmonious balance achievable when divine and mortal ingenuity worked in unison. The final confrontation symbolized more than victory or defeat. It represented the culmination of strategy, perseverance, and cooperation. Ogun's triumph was not a testament to strength alone, but to intelligence, preparation, and the integration of human courage into the divine narrative. Olokun's retreat left the ocean restless, a reminder that vigilance and respect for the sea's power would always be necessary. Mortals, having played a critical role, emerged wiser, stronger, and forever bound to the saga of gods who shaped their world. With the war concluded, Ogun consolidated his victories, reinforcing defenses, training future generations, and ensuring that the lessons of the conflict endured. Olokun returned to the depths, aware that his power remained vast, but also that ingenuity, unity, and strategy could counter even the most overwhelming force. The world, once teetering on the edge of chaos, now rested under a balance forged by courage, wisdom, and divine foresight. The saga of Ogun versus Olokun ended not in total destruction, but in a new era of respect and vigilance, a testament to the enduring collaboration between gods and mortals. The final confrontation was over, yet its legacy would shape the land, the sea, and the hearts of humans for generations to come.